militarily for obvious reasons. Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are?
That's the commitment we made. That's the commitment we made. We are not, look, here's the situation. We agree with the one China policy. We signed on to it and all the attendant agreements made from there. But the idea that it can be taken by force, just taken by force, is just not appropriate. It will dislocate the entire region and be another action similar to what happened in Ukraine. And so it's a burden that is even stronger.
That was U.S. President Joe Biden doing a joint news conference with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in Tokyo, saying that the United States would intervene militarily if China were to invade Taiwan in May 2022. And here's U.S. former President Donald Trump during an interview with Fox News' Maria Bartimauro.
Should the U.S. help defend Taiwan if it means going to war with China?
Well, I don't want to say it because if I'm in the position of president, I don't want to say what I'm thinking. You know, if I answer that question, it'll put me in a very bad negotiating position. With that being said, Taiwan did take all of our chip business. You know, we used to make our own chips. Now they're made in Taiwan. 90% of the chips
Advanced
are made in
semiconductor
Taiwan.
chips, 90% are made in Taiwan. If China goes in there, they'll be able to turn the world on and off. Isn't that right?
If China takes Taiwan, they will turn the world off, potentially. I mean, potentially. But remember this. Taiwan took, smart, brilliant, they took our business away. We should have stopped them. We should have taxed them. We should have tariffed them.
As these men seek re-election in November, what should we expect from their administrations? And how should Taiwan prepare to respond? You're listening to The Divide. My name is Iris Xu. And today we're going to explore the premise of whether there's a better candidate for the democracy and stability in the region, specifically the Taiwan Strait.
My name is Chris Horton. I'm an American journalist who has been in Taiwan for the past 9 years, covering Taiwanese politics, cross-strait issues and developments, and a little bit of Taiwanese society and culture as well. I've written for the New York Times, The Atlantic, Bloomberg News, and many other publications.
After the debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump on June 27th, Chris Horton wrote an article for Nikkei Asia on two men's Taiwan policy.
I watched the debate. Yes, it did not go very well for Joe Biden, obviously. We're still pretty far out from November 5th, and a lot can happen in that time. A lot has happened just this year. You know, at the very beginning of the year, Trump looked pretty much down and out, and now he's had a resurgence, but there's still several months to go, and lots of things can happen. The U.S. public, a lot of the U.S. public seems to be pretty upset with the recent Supreme Court ruling in Trump's favor that, you know, grants executive powers that have never really been, I mean, it seems unlimited as long as it's deemed an official act. I think there's a lot of Americans who are pretty upset with the Supreme Court ruling that is clearly in Trump's favor, and there's frustration with justices like Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, and that frustration could spill. You know, these are Republican appointed justices. That frustration could spill over into people not showing up for Trump or voting for Biden while holding their noses. But you know, there's still, just like Taiwanese politics, you know, a few months, anything can happen. And you know, both candidates are quite old, so like, there's health issues could become a part of that as well. But yeah, I think in terms of how things will go under Biden or Trump, it's safe to say that at least going into it, Taiwan policy should probably remain roughly the same. Republicans and Democrats are both, they pretty much agree on well, maybe two things. But yeah, I mean, it would be Taiwan and Israel. And so support for Taiwan, bipartisan support for Taiwan is quite strong, especially in the Congress. After the recent election in January, when Lai Ching-te and Xiaobi Kim were elected, the first delegation that came over from the United States, it was a bipartisan delegation. I met with the Democrat representative Ami Bera from California, and he's one of the chairs of the Taiwan caucus, if I'm not mistaken. And Representative Bera told me that, you know, he's not worried, and, you know, regardless of who is president, he's not concerned about like any wavering support for Taiwan. He thinks the Republicans are just as focused on keeping the status quo, maintaining the status quo, and trying to convince China that it's not in its interest to start any major conflict in this region. And, you know, you can only do so much. Like, if, you know, we don't know what Xi Jinping is thinking. It's a bit of a black box over there. So that's, I think the real variable might be with regard to what China does, you know. And so if China sees Biden as, you know, a doddering old man that they can, you know, kind of roll the dice on, which they haven't so far, it seems, then maybe they'll try to, you know, escalate. But it does seem like there's been some escalation even since the inauguration of Lai Ching-te. So it's, you know, in terms of stability, there's only so much that you can do when there's a party that clearly is unafraid of escalation and changing the status quo and increasing its coercive efforts militarily, but also economically, politically. And yeah, I think it's the biggest variable will remain China. As far as Trump goes, a lot of people are worried about Trump abandoning Taiwan. He's been quoted by his former national security advisor, I believe, John Bolton, in his book about serving in the Trump administration, comparing the Oval Office desk, I think it's called the Resolution Desk. That was China, and then he held up a magic marker, a felt tip marker, and the tip of this is Taiwan. But I attended a book launch recently featuring Matt Pottinger and Ivan Kanapathy. They both applauded his kind of, you know, there's this strategic ambiguity versus strategic clarity debate in the U.S. And while it's hard to say what is or isn't strategic ambiguity, it does seem like as China has increased, you know, raised the tensions. I mean, they don't raise themselves. China's raising the tensions, clearly. Taiwan does not want a conflict with China. The U.S. clearly doesn't either. But China, you know, kind of the growing impatience of Xi Jinping is of concern to both parties. And but you know, both Pottinger and Kanapathy, they praised Biden's unequivocal statements that if there was an unprovoked attack by China on Taiwan, that the U.S. would step in and help defend Taiwan. What that means, what the red lines, or what would trigger that, you know, it's really hard to say, because there's no longer a mutual defense alliance that ended in '79 with the whole derecognition of the ROC and recognition of the PRC by the U.S. government. So, yeah, we're in a situation right now where China is, and maybe, you know, it does seem like people in Beijing do feel like there's, you know, a conspiracy, but like there's really not anybody in the U.S. that wants China or Taiwan to become to get rid of the ROC and become the Republic of Taiwan, you know, which we all lazily refer to as Taiwan independence. Taiwan has never been part of the People's Republic of China. For those few listening to RTI that don't know that already. Yeah, it's really just anyways, getting back to Pottinger and Kanapathy. Pottinger said that he hoped that whoever the next future presidential candidates, that they would take this kind of new status quo that we have with Biden just making very clear statements of support for Taiwan, not just standing with Taiwan, but helping militarily defend Taiwan against China. That that there should be no like retreat from that, and that's something that will be interesting to see. I don't think should Taiwan come up in future presidential debates this campaign season, I don't see either. I mean, obviously Biden's probably not going to walk back his previous very assertive statements, and Trump, I don't think so. I don't see him doing that either. The Heritage Foundation, which is a right-wing think tank that is very supportive of Trump, and they've put together this document, the 2025 Project, which is very, very conservative. But when it comes to national security and foreign policy, it seems quite clear that Taiwan is very important to them. So even though they might have policies that domestically might not be popular with the majority of Americans, I think just in a Taiwan context, they've made it very clear that Taiwan is important to America's standing in the world, American national security, and American prosperity, as they put it. There's a document, a report that someone at Heritage put together. His name's Michael Cunningham, and he makes it very clear that Taiwan is super important to the United States and its national interests. And Pottinger, he said in the book event recently, he said, during his time in the White House, he saw President Trump increasingly grasp and appreciate the importance of Taiwan to America's defense, also to national security and to its economy. And so my guess is, should we end up having another Trump presidency, that the Lai administration will probably do what it can, just like the Tsai administration did in 2017, do what it can to not cause headaches for Trump, whatever those possible headaches might be. It's hard to say, but basically not creating problems for a Trump administration, staying out of the news, not really getting in the way of anything, and probably buying lots of weapons and weapons systems, because Trump, as we all saw, he's a very transactional president, and I think he's well understood over here. And while Lai Ching-te might not be super well known in D.C., having Xiaobi Kim as vice president, I think, will also be an asset in a potential Trump administration. Xiao's personal network in D.C. and in Congress, it's very strong in terms of Republicans and conservative politicians.
It seems that there won't be any drastic changes to Taiwan policy regardless of whether Trump or Biden wins the presidential election. But I still want to know which of these two candidates would be a better choice for Taiwan's democracy, as well as national defense.
Well, I think, when you compare Trump and Biden, I mean, Biden is much more consistent in his messaging. He's got more of a script, and when it comes to Taiwan, I mean, he was right there when the Taiwan Relations Act was signed. He was one of the signers when the American Chamber of Commerce president at the time, whose name escapes me, when he went over for hearings before a House committee that was looking into how to handle the relationship with the ROC. Well, after getting rid of the ROC relationship, the official relationship, moving into an unofficial relationship with Taiwan, Biden he's been part of the unofficial relationship between the U.S. and Taiwan from the beginning. He was one of the signers of the Taiwan Relations Act 45 years ago, and he's also he's made a lot of trips to China and met a lot of Chinese leaders. He's always been a strong supporter of Taiwan. And one of the big differences that I see between Trump and Biden in terms of Taiwan and how they've handled the unofficial relationship with Taiwan, the Trump administration, at least, they took things to the highest. I mean, with working with the Tsai administration, the two sides brought US-Taiwan ties to a new high, and there was a lot of concern in Taiwan when Biden won that things might change and that he might try to be a bit too conciliatory to China, and that did not happen. And one thing that Biden did, rather than kind of improve the bilateral relationship between Washington and Taipei, one thing he did, he brought in other countries. So he's multilateralizing, the security of the Taiwan Strait. So now you have Japan and the Philippines and even South Korea, who they only broke ties with the ROC in 1992 to recognize Beijing, and they South Korean leaders rarely even bring up the Taiwan Strait. And Yoon, who probably won't last long, he's not really establishment. So I think it's easier for him to just to say what he feels rather than worry about the future of his party and in future elections. But I think one thing that some of the people advising potential next Trump administration, one thing that they might do is keep on with this multilateralization, or they might go back to just kind of doing their own thing. And it's really hard to say because we don't know who would be advising Trump in this next administration. And there's, it would seem like after testifying against Trump, someone like Pottinger probably is not going to be in the room. And he seemed to be one of the more kind of sober voices when it came to China. I mean, calling things out for what they were, but not being too escalatory or dramatic or emotional. And even though he, a lot of people who comment on China and cross-strait relations consider him a hawk. I mean, I think he's just calling a spade a spade. I mean, China is basically, you've seen their actions recently around Jinmen. They're probing for softness. They're trying to find the weak spots and move in wherever they can. And there's increasing numbers of flights across the median line. There's and I don't think anyone's surprised that Beijing's trying to test the Lai administration. But he has a lot on his plate. Just right off the bat, much more than Tsai did. And while I think most people here, my understanding is the Tsai administration was kind of blindsided by the Trump victory. And to their credit, they worked through the channels that they had, and they got the call with Trump, the congratulatory call when he was still president-elect, not when he was president. So it wasn't an official call. It was the president of Taiwan calling a private citizen who would later become president. But it's, a lot of people considered that provocative or whatever. But at the end of the day, it didn't really, the sky didn't fall. And, I think while nobody wants to give Beijing excuses or, things that justifications for lashing out, I think, you have to, just like Beijing does, I think Taiwan and the United States, in terms of pursuing their interests, which is basically Taiwan remaining sovereign and free, they can maybe do some of the same stuff. They can try similar tactics, and I think Tsai did that. She didn't push too hard, but that phone call, I think that was a bold step, and it worked out quite well. It got people talking about Taiwan and American Taiwan policy and China policy, and it reminded people that Taiwan's a democracy where like Taiwanese people, 19 million people go to the polls and vote for their leader, and it's important for Taiwan to have visibility.
It is important for Taiwan to have visibility, to remind people that we are a democracy under threat. And as long as we can hold free elections in Taiwan, the idea that democracy and freedom can be exported will live on. Thank you for listening to The Divide. This episode is produced by Radio Taiwan International.